Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy and Mike. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back.
Good morning. We are on the other side of 400. Let's go 1,000, baby.
Just kind of keep clipping along, right? It's just slow, consistent work to get you to 400.
Oh, man. How you doing this morning?
I'm okay. Really still struggling with this cold thing that's going on. Been a mess. So I apologize if I sound a little bit nasally more than normal. So if that bothers you, sorry. This is the episode for today. I'm going to try to keep my nose as clear as I can and be able to mitigate any extra noise from blowing tissues and such. So hopefully I'll get there soon. It's been hanging on for a while. It's been a really bad cold.
The positive thing is we're getting closer to spring. Our snow melted over the weekend, and it's like, all right, this may be a sign.
Yeah, it's definitely like the warm weather. Got out a little bit yesterday, walked around a bit with the warmer weather. I was like, this is nice. So finally, out of our northern areas, we can the bear can come out of the cave now, right, and roam around a bit. We're starting to wake up from this slumber that is our winter.
You could really sympathize on hibernation when you have a Chicago winter or Midwest winter.
Yeah, I'm just going to stay inside. I don't want to go outside. It's too cold.
To the point I'm a little jealous.
True. You can just skip the whole winter, sleep it all off. Yeah, that would be nice. Awesome. Well, jumping into today, our main topic is going to just be around SQL databases, more specifically, Fabric SQL databases. Just kind of going through the what, the why, and the how of SQL databases. What are we experimenting with right now? What are we doing with them? And kind of our initial reactions to some more around what the SQL databases are doing inside Fabric. That's a new feature that's out. It's currently in preview. It's not officially GA'd yet, but we're already playing with the features.
And let's give a shout out to Nicola, who wrote the article that was our inspiration for today, and also kind of how we're going to phrase today. So excellent article.
Nicola Illick, I think is the name.
Yep.
And he's going through and just kind of doing the what, why, and how of SQL databases. So we're going to unpack his article, talk about what he's, kind of go through what he was describing there and just see how that relates to our experiences as well. All right, that being said, let's go into some news here. We actually do have some news for once. Tommy, you got a topic for us here around news.
So not just news, but I'm going to give you a scenario. And with all the social media out there today, it made me think. Imagine in front of you, there are 4 buttons. You can only choose one of these buttons. Choosing that button is one of the social media platforms. And what I'm going to put in front of you is LinkedIn, YouTube, X, and GitHub. You can only choose one of those. And the one you choose is the only one you will have for the rest of your life. Now, you consider the entertainment, for work, for Power BI, all the things you love to do online. Out of those 4 social media platforms, which one are you choosing?
That's a good question. If I had to pick all the channels or the different ways that I get connectivity through them, right? Not sure I would really call GitHub a social media platform, but X for sure, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. I mean, I could do without Facebook. Doesn't really help me at all. I will say that most of my mentality right now around anything social media it's not about personal stuff anymore. It's just about work stuff. Everything I put on there is work stuff. There's very few personal experience and things. I think it just feels like bragging. It feels too fake to put a lot of personal things on social media anymore. That's that one happy moment with everyone smiling in the picture, and you didn't realize before that moment there was screaming and crying and yelling and get in line, stop doing that, put that down, and then all of a sudden you get the snapshot of everyone smiling and it looks like this happy moment. So maybe I'm a bit more cynical than that and don't post as much stuff anymore. But of all the content pieces though I think that are out there, I think YouTube would probably have to be the one that I'm on the most. And I think I find the most opportunity for YouTube for both professional and personal growth through the YouTube platform. So if I had to pick only one platform that I had to stick with forever, it would probably be YouTube.
Yeah.
Maybe for me right now, a close second is X. I like what they're doing with things. It seems like I get a good amount of engagement when I post content around data platform things. So, I mean, from the 2 platforms that seem to have the most richer engagement for me and what I'm posting, I think those are probably my top 2. LinkedIn, I can kind of take it or leave it. It was interesting. LinkedIn was growing fairly quickly for a bit. and it just kind of stalled out for me. It just kind of hasn't really. It's been growing, but just really slowly. So LinkedIn doesn't seem to be as engaging of content as the other platforms that I've seen.
Hmm.
What about you, Tom?
I figured I already made a side bet with myself that you choose YouTube, and it makes sense, right? I mean, obviously, a ton we do here. You tell me you're one of the ways you learn too, or really taking information is also in that medium.
Yeah.
With GitHub in there, and I called it a social media platform. It has a news feed. It's a developer social media. You get updates. It's definitely in a very different platform, but honestly, I chose it to make it harder for myself.
Really?
Using one. So YouTube, I love. I get a ton out of it. It's
Yeah.
something that I do during work and have it on. But it's also one of those ones where you're like, for Lent, you're like, I may take it out. Like, like it's one of those also like it would be good to have it out.
You can
Ex-
you can spend a lot of time on YouTube. That's also the other downside of it.
It's a good fasting choice.
Yeah, I mean, you could spend a lot of time on there.
Right.
I do feel like I keep saying this to people, and I don't know if this is actually ever going to come to like a reality, but the amount of information and knowledge that people are out there just teaching you for free.
Yeah.
Like I look at
Yeah.
the classes and the things that people can learn on Power BI.
Mhm.
Not all of them perfect all the time, but I really do feel like there needs to be some
There's
kind
a
of
lot.
like YouTube education. There probably is something already out there, but like almost like,
Oh
hey,
my god.
there's content creators that are making content that is educational in nature and focusing on highlighting their content.
Yeah.
And actually, what I found is when you make content that people trade on or learn or educate around, they'll easily consume free content. Like there's no barrier to entry for free content.
Once
However,
you get
free content comes with the idea of like it may be good, it may not be good, right? So people pay for content that is organized. It's
Mhm.
sanitized a bit. It has a direction. It has like some pattern to it. So I think that's where people starting like, okay, I could go learn all these things on my own, but I really just need like someone to guide me through. And I
Yeah.
think there needs to be some kind of like YouTube university, YouTube learn YouTube something that teaches you when you could learn full like there's a whole MIT classes on there that are on programming and data science and learning things and all these AI things now, how to chat with an AI bot to build apps and
Yeah.
how quickly that I'm watching. This is impressive stuff. I just wish I had more time to kind of really dive in and learn and understand what these apps and AIs could do for us.
And I mean, we've contributed to it too. We had our Let's Learn Fabric series. You have a ton of other series on there too. All
Exactly.
that being said, I'm keeping YouTube for the kids because, like, Crash Course, you want something for them when they get to junior high, high school for history.
Sure.
Crash Course is awesome. But for me, I'm picking GitHub. And I'm picking GitHub because it's the one I really do get the most, I think, enjoyment and learning out of. I love, and it's because I
Interesting.
get to do something. Like everything else is a consumer. I am consuming something. With GitHub, yeah, I can learn things, but I can also clone a repository, anything I want, try it out, test it out. And I love that aspect of it. I will be very sad missing YouTube, and I will be pretty sad missing X because I get a lot of my like Power BI stuff and Yankee stuff there. But I love the doing side of things, and it would be very hard to not have the GitHub and all the things. Training materials are on there. I just saw. I'll have to give the shout out where it's due, but someone has PowerShell scripts now to create 30 workspaces for a training class, and then to remove that with like pseudo users. And it's like,
Yes.
well, that's awesome. I would never thought of that.
Yeah.
GitHub's given me a lot of joy and learning that the other ones I think fail. And I could get by with podcasts for my entertainment. I think I could live with that if I need
Sure.
to.
Interesting. That's an interesting take on that because I wouldn't really have quantified GitHub as a social media platform. I would kind of maybe more stick it into a um, tool or a work something. It feels more work to
Yeah.
me.
Well, it's got all the components. It's got all the ingredients of a social media platform. It's got a news feed. You can mention people. You can follow people, like
Sure.
people. So yeah.
There's
Anyways, but
some chat
yeah,
boards. You can get you can make a repo, put issues on it, talk about
communicate
it.
with people. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you're kind of right. I never really thought of it that way, but now that you kind of put that light on there, it could really, yeah, it could totally be a social media platform kind of thing. Interesting. All right, well, let's move on. One more other item here. Tommy, you found something else off of the Microsoft blog here,
mhm.
announcing the launch of Microsoft Fabric quotas. What do we think
Yeah.
this is?
So this is just came out, I believe, yesterday evening. And what Fabric quotas are is simply giving constraints for each region on for paid customers. So simply safeguarding the service against activities that can exploit resources. Quotas are also used by Azure services. So if you've already used Azure, this shouldn't be too foreign to you. But if you haven't, again, coming from the world of Fabric, it simply limits the number of capacity units a customer can provision. And it makes sense too, because I think this goes to my blessing and a curse philosophy around a lot of Microsoft products. It's so easy to create something that you may not know the cost behind it until it's too late. And this is one of the ways to do it.
The way I read this article, like there's a little language in here around like making sure we protect our compute, make sure there's not fraudulent activities, make sure there's not other things. And the other day I just walked into a client's environment. You remember when you were getting your trial, your Fabric trial?
Yes.
You remember that? I had never seen a dialog box when you get your free trial that let you pick the region. Do you know you can do that now?
I didn't know that on a trial, but I know what you're talking about. I saw that online on social media.
In Azure, you can go pick your like region of where you live. But now if you go to get a Microsoft Fabric trial, you can pick what region the trial lives in. It doesn't automatically go to your default region for Power BI. This creates a little bit of challenge for me because one, I understand that it's a trial. I get it. That makes sense. But I'm a little bit nervous about that feature because now you could potentially pick a trial for a Fabric SKU that is not even near your data centers or not even near where your rest of your Fabric environment is, which could, I think, incur some additional costs for you. Again, it's a trial, but there still is egress and ingress to data if you're having like things talk to a blob storage account outside of the scope of Fabric. So there is, if you keep everything inside Fabric, you're probably going to have very little risk. But if you start connecting to like blob storage accounts or external storage things with Spark, those computes can get really chatty and potentially could cost you some money, like real money talking between regions or something like that. So the other thing I looked at here, I'm reading this when it goes, they talked about like, we must safeguard against our fraudulent activities to exploit compute resources. If I remember correctly, I have like a quota for Synapse. I had a quota for something. So you could only have like 2 Synapse environments. You had to go call Microsoft or fill out a help desk ticket to get more quotas. Or like let's say you're going to go get a virtual machine and you're going to get a VSD3. Yeah, or whatever. There's a limited amount of those things you can go request, and your quota is only of a certain amount. Like your quota only lets you use, 10 or 100 or 20 cores, virtual cores to use that computer. And then you had to go into go into Azure and change that quota, request more cores so you could buy a bigger machine. Somewhat of a pain when you were using Spark. And the fact that Fabric is not getting quotas makes me feel like this is a problem that they saw arising because of the Spark engine, because I think the Spark engine and how Microsoft has implemented it, it's kind of aggressively grabbing a bunch of cores. Like it's just really, like every user that's out there, every time you split up a Fabric, you could have a lot of cores getting absorbed, and those F SKUs can really eat up, especially the trials. You've got 64 compute units, which I think one compute unit is 2 cores, I think is how it goes. I think it's 1-to-2 ratio. So that means that would be like 128 cores you could potentially go use. Anyways, all this to say, I'm going way into the weeds on technical here. It's interesting that they're doing this. I think this is more around them being able to budget their cores better than it is a feature for us. I think they're trying to pitch it as like this is a good thing. And in my opinion, I'm like
announcing the new,
yeah, I think this is more of you protecting yourselves and making sure there's a good, consistent experience for people. So I'm not really seeing like this is not, in my opinion, this is not really a protection for us, the users. It's more of a protection for Microsoft to start limiting us and adding one more layer of things we need to know how to do. So as an admin, you for sure should know about this. This is something you're going to want to understand, especially as you move over to Fabric from P SKUs or F SKUs or P or A SKUs, because this is definitely uniquely different.
And I mean, it makes a little sense too, because they're doing the same thing right now with a lot of the AI virtual machines, right? If you want a AI virtual
Yes.
machine, which needs a GPU, you have to request a quota for that VM. And I think again, we're dealing with a ton of, to your point, all the different cores, all the different services, all in one.
Yeah.
Well, it's very easy, and I imagine it could be incredibly easy for that to get out of hand very quickly on their end. So
What do you think is the abuse that's happening here? I mean, I'm not.
that I don't know.
That's. I can't quite figure that out. I mean, they're saying like fraudulent or abuse of the compute. I don't really understand that comment in the blog post because if I look at like you're turning on
actually,
the FSKU, like you're paying for it. Like I don't understand like what
I
are
wonder if it has to do
people
with
literally just
Python.
buying really big FSKUs and paying a ton of money for no reason? Like that doesn't seem
But
like right.
I imagine it has something to do with Python. Since you can really run most Python packages and Python has a lot of capabilities, I don't like that's the only place I can imagine you can actually, in a sense, hack the system or actually do something that would cause that. I
I mean,
can create a
maybe
Python script to
the only thing I can really think about here would be like maybe we're starting a bunch of fabric trials and they're somehow absorbing a bunch of cores and we want to limit in a different way how many cores are being, but at the end of the day, honestly, like I think this is a constraint issue on Microsoft. As Fabric is growing, they don't have enough cores available for us
yeah.
to run everything at this point. So that's what they're doing. The quotas to slowly roll out by region. Like, hey, this region's got 2 million cores or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I can only like when they're starting getting, they need something that's going to like require quotas so that this also maybe is something where they could shift that quota amount. Like companies that are bigger in nature, like bigger, more larger customers, they can shift that quota to them versus others. I don't really know how it all goes behind the scenes here. I'm just speculating on all this stuff.
No, I imagined it's like when my debit card company notifies me that I spent $40 for breakfast at Taco Bell, where there's kind of like that doesn't seem normal. And I bet with all these people spinning up trials, it's kind of like it just sets off some red flags, and they don't know that 40,000 people at a company are doing a trial at the same time.
I don't know either. It just
Yeah.
seems interesting. Maybe it's a way of Microsoft governing the ability for them to shift the cores to companies that are actually using it at scale versus the ones that are just dabbling in it and starting out a little bit. That's what I have found in the other past with cores. Like if you're a small company, you have to
Mhm.
request cores. It's a little bit more pain for you to get what you need. When you're a big company, you just type in a big number and boom, it's done. Like
Right.
you're not paying for the items. You're just reserving them. You're saying, this is a quota that I think I may want to use. Anyways,
1,000%.
interesting article. Definitely check it out. If you're an admin of Power BI, you definitely want to understand what the Fabric quotas are doing. And you may even want to go check to see what your Fabric quotas are right now currently and see what that looks like for you. So anyways, very interesting thing there as well. All right, moving on. Main topic for today. I'm going to do that. Are we good for main topics?
Let's dive in.
Okay. Let's dive into our main topic today. Is our topic from Data Mozart. I'll put the item here in the chat window. This is Data Mozart, and it's Fabric SQL database. What, why, and how. So that's going to be our main link here. We're going to go through that item there, and then initial reactions. Tommy, what do you think about this article?
Well, and I think for today's kind of conversation, I think to answer those three questions in the way that we see it, the what, why, and how is a great way. We've already talked about the SQL database and Fabric, but it's really important that we back up too. And again, really, hopefully we've already done this, but pound the significance of this being available to us. I always start my dashboard and day trainings, and I always love to talk to them about once upon a time, if you worked in an office, there's a back room that was 10 degrees warmer than every other room in the office
Yep.
that only IT was allowed in. The lights were always off, and there were, matrix like machines in there.
Yes.
That's Power BI now just packaged. But the joke around there is the SQL analysis services. But I mean, we're coming from a time not long ago. I was still working, Mike, when many of my offices had SQL servers on premise that were managed that way.
Yeah.
But the company, what is it? And obviously there was no Power BI, but companies survived and thrived and needed those SQL servers in order to function because it was transactional.
And when you buy a SQL server on prem, there's some considerations. Like a lot of conversation happens around like what size of machine do I need? How much hard drive space do I want? What size of data am I going to? So there's a lot of planning that kind of goes into like buying that box.
Right.
on-prem. And so this is a mindset shift that when I was talking to people around Fabric or Microsoft products, comparing that to cloud-based products, right? In the on-prem world, you buy the box. The machine is purchased. It's a capital expense. You kind of pay for it. You buy the box. It shows up. You install it, right? It's locked in. So you're basically buying the compute. The compute's purchased. You already bought it all. There's no need to use any less of it. So to maximize your investment on-prem, you don't want to overrun the machine so much that it falls over, but you want to run it like 80, 70%, right? Of its capacity all the time, like, because that's the machine. You've already paid for the money. You want to best utilize that investment. It's cost you a lot of dollars to get it there, and the storage on that machine is very expensive. You're talking, thousands of dollars. I mean, maybe it's cheaper now, but like it was expensive to store things on that machine. So to get more disk drive space with server grade, all the things, right? It's not cheap. So I bring this up to say the compute was cheap because it was prepaid, and the storage was expensive because you had to go buy more of it whenever the machine ran out of space or when you were trying to store more things.
And it was physical. I lived in Florida for a bit, and I remember during the hurricanes, they would have to move it. The company had to shut down.
No way.
Yeah. So when everyone is evacuating, it's like, hey, we're going to be offline for the next 3 days, like in terms of anything you can do, because we got to move the machine to another safer place. We got to move it out of the office. And these are all the considerations. And again, it wasn't just your reporting, to your point too. It was everything.
I didn't even think of that, but that's a really good point because I mean, if you're in a hurricane path and all your data's gone, so someone would physically turn off the machine, put it in their car, and drive it somewhere.
Exactly.
That seems so unsafe.
But that was, what other options did you have at the time?
That's true.
So
then this is where I think Nicola does a good job kind of like now walking you through like this story. So in the beginning part of his article, he talks a little bit about this, like the move. One thing he doesn't put on here was like the on-prem SQL Server, right? So that would be kind of like the precursor to all the things he's talking about here. But he jumps in and he does, I think, a really good diagram here of like, here, look, we had infrastructure as a service, which means a SQL Server on Azure VM. This would be like an physical box. Turn on the VM, install the software of the SQL Server. So you're paying the license for the VM and you're paying the license for the SQL Server. And then he moves over to platform as a service, which is Azure SQL managed instance. So it takes a little bit of your control away, like what you can do on the SQL Server itself, because you're not installing things, you're not installing your own patches. I think you're taking a little bit of management away from the users, but you're giving still the full capability of storing tables, making things. You have all the richness of a infrastructure as a service, but you've given a little bit more control to Microsoft. Then we move over to PaaS. Again, it's platform as a service again, but now it's Azure SQL database. And now you stop worrying about the hardware. You don't care what machine it's on. You're not picking the VM. You're saying, I want this database, turn it on. Microsoft, you figure out all the hardware side. Just give me a connection string and let me connect to it, which actually my preference in cloud things, I love the Azure SQL database. It's been really rich from that perspective.
I was going to say, okay.
Go ahead. Do you want to jump in there real quick?
I was going to say all those things you're pointing out here, the critical part of this from the data analyst point of view, that I just wanted to briefly touch on too. Like, again, most organizations, even really before Power BI, part of what made Power BI so significant was it was more than just SQL, right? Because a lot of your reporting tools, it's like you can upload a document, but you couldn't refresh that document. You can upload your CSV file, create a report.
Interesting.
But most business intelligence tools, the requirement was some SQL type server. Anything that was a local file had to upload that document. It wasn't going to connect to that document. And again, like a lot of what data analysts have done was like you had to rely on a SQL server and all of these capacities in the networks. But a big part here of what we've done over the past 15 years, over the last 10 years, has been on, well, hopefully there's a SQL server. Can I get a connection to this so we can actually refresh this?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And so that's kind of the thing of Fabric is you're getting a lot of the analytics side of things, but you're not necessarily having to do all the the management of the infrastructure of things.
Mhm.
And that's the
Right.
part that I think I'm going to point out here.
Yeah.
Go over one more environment to software as a service, and that's where now Fabric SQL database shows up. So this is another shift in what Microsoft has done with SQL. So it was infrastructure, platform, and now it's software as a service. So now you don't, and this is what I feel like has happened here is the management of the item has slowly moved away more and more. So you used to have a database administrator, DBA, and they would work on making sure the machine stays up and has the right memory and all the things. That DBA role has slowly been pulled out of these different systems. There's still probably some DBA work that needs to be done, but it's more of a focusing on optimizing the tables, making sure they're performant, maybe cleaning up things that are not in there. But the management of the actual hardware has now been removed.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of where we put ourselves in Fabric SQL databases, which is now still SQL. You can still write your normal T-SQL on it, but it's now there's been features removed that you just don't worry about. Microsoft handles all that for you, which I really like this experience. It feels like they missed a mark here, though. It feels like they should have had an icon with some sort of word of SQL on it because
Instead of the F kind of thing.
well, every single database
Oh
for
yeah.
SQLs has always had the word SQL on it,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you get the Fabric SQL database and you get an icon that's like totally different. It doesn't even
Yeah.
look like a database. So maybe that was intentional, but the Fabric database doesn't look like a SQL database in a
Yeah.
traditional sense.
Well, because even Synapse looked like an S too, the logo for that too. And a
Yeah,
lot of people didn't catch that. But I love to the point where we're at with the Fabric SQL database. I love how Nicola really kind of outlines what the SQL database is because obviously it's a SQL database,
yeah.
but there are important components that make it different than what you've experienced in the past. One, like Azure, it relies on massive parallel processing and simply means the data is across multiple nodes. But the difference, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, unlike an Azure database basic, the data is stored in Parquet. And I do not believe that is the case with normal Azure SQL databases.
I don't know if it's actually stored in. Well, I don't know if it's actually stored in Delta. Well, let me say it this way. Yes, it's probably stored in Parquet, but I think it's stored in like a Delta table is what I think it's maybe
Yeah.
stored as. So
It,
it's like they've shifted like the technology stack. It's like they've gone.
right.
So this has been interesting because it feels like a lot of what they're doing with most of the
Oh,
technology
yeah.
around, right? It feels like a lot of the technology pieces that they're playing with is, hey, we're going to give you Spark, we're going to give you Python notebooks, we're going to give you
Mhm.
all the other things. And by the way, this SQL platform as a service is now going to directly
Right.
read from the lake house, the one lake. And this is something that was actually produced back in Synapse. I use this
Mm.
feature in Synapse. And one of the reasons I liked Synapse was because I could pay per query the compute it needed to go get the data from the lake house. So it was the whole charging mechanism for SQL inside Synapse was very different. It was charged by the terabyte. You could run the query, and how many terabytes it accessed was how much it charged you for it. And it was like 1 terabyte for $5. Like you had a really good amount of um, capacity for very cheap, honestly. And so what was happening is the SQL server was running the queries, but then it was passing those queries down to the Delta table. Beneath it, it could read things at the Delta table levels, which to me, that's really the point that I really like here.
Right.
That's what I really like about the SQL stuff in general is
Yeah.
it's using what I would, and maybe it's not more modern, but it's using a more open standard to
Yeah.
store data into it. And then it'll make it easier for you to get data in and out of the lakehouse and or read it with other compute things all in the same experience. And that's what I really like about this one.
Yeah.
That's the part that's like makes this shine for me.
And I think it's the underrated win here too is the SQL data is still stored in OneLake. And I don't think we give enough credit to the architecture of what OneLake is because how significant, how easy that makes our lives. Like OneLake is almost like the iTunes of data, where it's like it just works. When I had my iPod, I didn't have to worry about where my music was. I just log in, I get my music, and how that changed our lives. The fact that all these different services and now a SQL database is stored in OneLake, and I have it in that same capacity, and it just works. I mean, we've never had an easier way to have our data ever in our lives. It's
Yes.
almost almost to the point where you're almost like a little jaded when people didn't realize what life was like before iPhones. Like, no. Like, you had to rememorize a phone number, right?
Yeah.
Like, you almost like
Yeah.
you don't know what life was like, my friend. Do you remember driving somewhere and you had to print out the directions?
Oh yeah. I
That
had
was the thing.
I had Google Sheets.
MapQuest.
Yeah, I had MapQuest. I had
Yeah.
Google, directions, and it would have like turn left here, and it had a little map with like a little arrow.
Mhm.
Like it was all the things you should have had on your phone, but it was printed out beforehand.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I took a couple of trips across country for work, and I remember having a big map, like just a huge
Yeah.
map in my car, and
Yeah.
I'd put it between my seat and the center console, and I'd pick out my map, and I would be reading the map. Okay, where am I? What road am I on? You had to pay a lot more attention to what you're doing on the road,
100%.
reading signs. Okay, I'm on mile marker, whatever. Here's how many miles left to the next turn. Now the little blue screen sits in your car and tells you you've got 3.1 miles to your next turn. You just kind of doze out because
You're like a robot.
the mapping thing takes care of it all for you. But you're right. This is, do you remember when you were a kid and like you didn't have a phone and you had to like just when you went somewhere,
Yeah.
you went there and no one knew what you were doing when you were there. You were just
Mhm.
there. Like
Mhm.
it wasn't like they could track your
Dude,
location.
part of my planning for traveling was also the CDs I had with me,
Oh yeah.
because what you brought with you is the only thing you could listen to.
That's true too. You
So
couldn't go
I
get an unlimited music stream from
no,
Spotify.
like, I hope I remember my Weird Al CDs because that's what I was gonna
Oh
jam out
boy.
to. Yeah. But all that being said is we're on that other side of ease of data, where really it has been not this convoluted way and terrible process to get data, but the fact that we have this one lake integration with SQL databases, it's so easy that I feel like it's not getting the due it's deserved. But this is a really significant part of our own lives in data.
I agree. And I think how I've been talking about this a lot of times, Tommy. I
Mhm.
keep talking about like the idea that data and analytics is becoming a commodity. Like
Mhm.
everyone can do it. Everyone can use it. It's going to be more accessible to everyone. I think this is another attempt from Microsoft to do the same thing with they've done with like Power BI, semantic modeling. Like they've taken a very complex thing, like the analysis services cube was a pretty complex item, but they made it very easy to get data into it. They made it very easy to get data
Yeah.
shaped, modified, right? Data flows or Power Query is incredibly powerful. And a lot of the data shaping I need to do, I still today, to this day, I like whatever I need to have data I'm downloading from the internet. Just yesterday, I had like a project I was working on. And in that project, I spun up, an Excel document and sat down and said, hey, I'm going to just modify, shape this data in Power Query. I knew exactly what I was doing. Bip, 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 couple clicks, done, shape the way I wanted, add my
Mhm.
steps, great, done. And then I'm off to the races. So like the speed in which I can automate loading of things, and the sooner you
Yeah.
recognize anytime you shape data or modify, manipulate data, the odds of you having to do that one time only
Yeah.
very small. Even my little side project I did, like I did my little side project. I'm like, I'm just going to shape this data once. I wound up shaping it again, the same thing 3 separate times. The first time I did it, I was like, I just deleted some stuff and moved things around. I'm like, oh dang it! I didn't even listen to my own. I didn't even listen to my own.
Yeah.
Wisdom here, which is don't do that. Build it in Power Query. At least automate it to some degree. Then the second time I did it in Power Query in Excel. Great. And then things didn't go right. I had to go do the analysis again. And now that I'd already built everything in Power Query, the third time I just downloaded the file, hit refresh, and it was already done. So like you now learn, like I don't delete anything anymore. I put everything in
Oh,
a OneDrive, but like every little thing I do now, if I need to get data download it from somewhere, I immediately go to Power Query to build what I want to build. And then if I ever need to move it to Fabric or something like that, I can at least upload it to Fabric or something like that as well.
one of my first conferences I ever spoke at, I remember the two slides I said, one of them was created a Power BI model and uploaded it and never touched it again. Two people would raise their hand. The next slide said, you're lying, or you just don't know it yet.
Yes, you haven't had
So
a request to update your stuff yet.
right, because
Yeah,
it
that's
always
coming.
happens. Yeah. So, but it's true. I mean, this is true. It doesn't matter how experienced you are.
Yeah,
It's a lot of that's not up to you. To your point, where it's a business request, a business change.
yeah.
So I feel like we've hit the hammer pretty well on what the SQL Server is. I
Yes.
want to go through how Nicole's gone through the article because I really like the questions here. So let's kind of dive into the why use a Microsoft SQL database. And this goes to episode 400. We just talked about the choose a data store, but
Yes.
I think it also deserves attention how Nicola really outlines it, but also our own opinion and how it's changed with the SQL database. Because let's also put in context, Microsoft has been throwing a ton of products to us where when it first started, I know like obviously the benefits of a lake house.
Mhm.
And well, I think our initial conversations around SQL databases, you're like, well, but I have a lake house, right? So like, why would I then use a SQL database? So let me ask you, is that changed? Where kind of the mentality now on when or why to use a SQL database?
Yeah, so that's one of his first kind of bullet points here. Which it's again the when portion of the article is actually really good,
Mhm.
and I really think the one point that stands out to me here that I think it really resonates with me is the unification of the Fabric experiences and how easy it is to move between different products in Fabric and use the Fabric SQL database as a source or a sink, the place where you store data, very seamlessly in the system. So at the very bottom of the article, he says, let me give you a quick bullet list. And Nicola, thank you very much for giving me the bullet list at the end here. It's awesome. It's good summary on the bottom. You made a lot of great points in the word portion, but at the bottom here says, when you should consider a Fabric SQL database is when you're dealing with transactional data. There's one item. And I actually have a couple projects that I've done some not fully transactional data, but I've done some changes that are happening very rapidly on top of Delta tables. And there is, I have experience in the Delta tables. If you're using like Databricks or Spark, it's actually always up to date and it's very responsive, like when you're making changes. However, if you're using some of the automatic built-in like Fabric SQL database or Fabric data warehouse
Yeah.
experiences, those don't always get the data as fresh as possible. There's like some kind of job running on the back end. It's not on demand all the time. So I've seen a little bit of like lag between some of the Delta tables inside the Fabric experience. So, if you're trying to write and read data very quickly to a table, it's part of a process, it's part of a loading process, it's doing something, you're tracking something in a log, something along those lines. You might want to consider using the SQL database. It's more transactional in nature. So for that reason, if you're dealing with transactional data or you're building an application,
Yeah.
a Power App, something like that, that's going to be moving it in and out quickly, I would really consider using the Fabric SQL database because
I
that
got
seems it's
you.
a great pairing. It's T-SQL is your language of choice. Again, I'm not. That's an okay. I mean, it's a great comment, but for me, I'm like, Spark SQL, T-SQL. It doesn't. I'm not really. The languages all feel so close to me. With a
Yeah.
simple.
People have their preference, man.
I get it, and maybe that's what but like
I know where you're going.
anymore, like it's just a quick call to Copilot and say, I want to do this. Like this, what's the equivalent of this command from T-SQL and Spark SQL? Like it knows what to do. Like so, to me, like to really heavily say like one language is the only language you're going to learn, as long as you have the conceptual pieces of what's going on in the language, it should be just fine for you to figure out what the new function is. I very rarely find that there are any like major gaps between languages that I just couldn't do. Maybe one language is slightly more efficient at handling something a certain way than another language. Fine, but like in general, the stuff you're going to need to do with those items, they're pretty much the same, in my
You
opinion.
know, over 400 episodes, the one thing I really do appreciate more than anything are Carlo complaints over Python and Spark notebooks. It's really one of the things I look forward to now when it comes up. And to your point though, like, yeah, you have Copilot. Some people are going to have their preference, but yeah, you do. I see where you're coming from. Some people may not be as comfortable, but no, a Carlo complaint over Python is something that I look forward to on a weekly basis now.
I mean, I'm not going to complain about that one too. I mean, I'm not going to worry about it too much. My one complaint would be is freaking Copilot is not in enough too. Like that's my problem right now. Like give me like I don't need Copilot a lot,
Yeah.
but I need it when I need it, and it's usually when I'm writing a little bit of code somewhere here, there, wherever, and I'm like, I just need a little bit of extra help, so I have to go open like another browser, go somewhere else, take my notebook
Download the
once.
notebook, put it in VS Code so I can use the GitHub Copilot. That's what I do.
Exactly. Like
And
that's
it's like You're
It's
owning
right
the same one.
I already have
Microsoft.
Oh my gosh. I have a free Copilot that I want to use right now, and I can't because it's stuck in stinking Fabric. So
Oh, no.
doggone it. If you can give me Copilot in GitHub for free, why the heck can't I get Copilot for some
I know.
experiences in Fabric for
No, I
free?
understand that.
Or part of I'm already paying for the dumb thing. Like, fine, consume some of my CUs. I'm willing to take the hit on it because I need those figured out. I need the code figured out. Like, so Copilot for reports, Copilot for insights on data, don't care. Don't need it.
Yeah.
Not using it right now. I don't go looking for help for those kind of things. However, if I'm writing language or code, dude,
Yeah.
I'm always about let's find a Copilot that will work with me.
Yeah.
100%.
80% of my code in my notebooks right now, I've downloaded it, used like Cursor or Copilot,
Yes.
and wrote it and just send it right back up the stream.
Ship it. Good to go. So the other 3 points he makes
Well,
here around
yeah.
when to use Fabric SQL is no provisioning, no configuring, no managing the individual resource. It just kind of comes along for the ride. So this one, I think I've gotten so used to a program or
Mhm.
platform as a service, PaaS, platform as a service. I've gotten so used to it. Like that's just like, yep, that's all.
Mhm.
That's why I'm choosing this. It's just a checkbox for me anymore. Like, yep, does it
Yeah.
does it manage everything for me? Can I just turn it on? Can it just work? Great, let's just do that. So that I really like. It's part of source control with Fabric. This is the story Microsoft is trying to produce with Git and integration and
Yeah.
CI/CD. They're doing a better job of giving us tooling around how to properly do source control in
Yeah.
Fabric. It's getting better. It's not what I want it to be yet, but it's definitely getting better. So,
I would agree.
the Fabric using Fabric is becoming very refined. I feel like it's getting a lot better in general. The Git things, the professional developer pieces of Fabric, they're still working out a lot of those mechanics, I think. I think you're going to
Yeah.
need more time for them to really dial that in. I just saw the Fabric CI/CD Python library that just got published recently. Very promising. They're already making changes to it. When it first came out, I had some really big questions. They had some of this stuff called like find and replace. For example, like you have a notebook that's pointing to a lakehouse. The lakehouse has a GUID, and therefore you would need to replace that GUID in potentially multiple places as you move the notebook between different environments, dev, test, prod, because you might have different lakehouses. The level like that was a problem. You couldn't easily move those things. So they're trying to give you more control there. Ideally, they would just bake all this stuff into deployment pipelines and make deployment
Yeah.
pipelines be the thing that we do. But deployment pipelines is more talking about the artifacts, and that's about it.
Right.
So there's a lot more to consider when you're doing deployments of things that I think we want to control as developers. Stuff that Microsoft gives us access to, but it's not
Yeah.
available to us right now.
And I'm okay with the Git one because I know they're working on it. And obviously I would love all the products in there, but that wouldn't be my deal breaker at this point in terms of like, oh, well, now I got to use it because it has Git. Really, it's the first bullet point that Nicole talks about that is really the winner here. It's really the meat of what a SQL database is. Mike, I can give you stories of utilizing SQL databases in the Power Platform and the flexibility here. One of my favorite projects I worked on is we had 600 documents we had to write that used the word template, but it had to fill in all these invoices. It had to be 600. We had to send them out all at the same time. Well, we all had the data in SQL. We just sent a trigger and it would fill out 600 Word documents and the emails out to those people all at once.
Yep.
And the fact that it was so easy in a T-SQL and a SQL database was incredible. And again, half the things we migrated, the amount of projects I've worked on, we migrated off of Excel or SharePoint into a database is incredible because of Power Platform and tools like that. The flexibility to be able to do that and the need for organizations, just like ease of analytical reporting has become more and more of a want and a desire.
Sure.
That's the same with being able to touch my data and
Yes.
being able to manage my data and
Yeah.
own my data. And the fact that now we have this, to me, that's the meat and potatoes of the SQL database.
Yeah. And then the last point I'm supposed to put out here with Nicola, he
Yeah.
says the seamless integration of Fabric workloads. So to me, that's the win. And someone in chat, I think it was Donald, pointing out in chat here, when you get a Fabric SQL database, by default, it has mirroring turned on for you, which is nice because this means all the SQL tables that you get can be mirrored to the lakehouse automatically. So if you're pulling these tables from other stuff, so the automatic mirroring of this, that to me, I think mirroring is an underrated value added feature that Microsoft. I don't even think the name of the word mirroring is the right word
Giving
for
it justice, giving it
I don't
some
think so.
value.
It sounds like mirroring is like a copy activity. I think there's more things happening behind the scenes that mirroring is doing. If I think about like what we do in like Power Query, right? We do incremental refreshes, right? We're taking all the net new data and updating records so that it's all loaded correctly into your table. It's mirroring is doing a lot of the similar features as the experience of not mirroring, but it's the same experience as the incremental refresh, but way better, honestly. And I that's one area I need to unpack more. I think it's an underrated feature, the mirroring experience, being able to get your lakehouse tables just up to date. Send it, sends a black box. Let me unpack what mirroring to me is, right? You have a table, it sits in the lakehouse, and you're going to add changed records to it, right? So I just throw it an Excel file, a list of records, whatever it is. Here's the records I have that are going to be updated or inserted, and the mirroring experience just kind of figures it out and knows what to do with it. And so that's really intriguing to me of how they're just making that mirroring experience simpler to use. And that's the power of the SQL database portion of this. It just works and it's out of the box. And it's looking at the change log, transactional log of the SQL database and making sure your Delta table matches that other experience, which also very interesting to me as well. So I think it's a cool technology.
Interesting you say mirroring, because for me, the take my money aspect is the shortcuts, which I believe work with SQL tables and views.
Yeah.
And if you were to ask me personally, if I could only choose one, a mirroring or a shortcuts with SQL databases, I'm choosing shortcuts 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
The mirroring is awesome, but that's another feature here. And I think that goes back to that's what Nicole is talking about with the seamless integration. It's not just a SQL database that lives in Fabric.
Yes.
It's a SQL database that houses all the features of Fabric
Yes.
in it. And that is really what makes it incredible.
Yeah, and if you're in the data flow, SQL database shows up as an option to
right
get into it, or like it's a
It
source.
may not work yet, but
Well, it will be there. Like they'll figure it out. Like it's
I've had
right
my
now,
problems.
they'll figure. Yeah, right. First world problems here. But that's they're going to like that's an experience that's there, right? If you're in the Python notebook, you can then connect to it. It's already authenticated. The user that's so there's a lot of other things that you have to manage as a DBA, like who has access to it, what tables do they have access to, what are all the rights of these things, right? You can now with Fabric, it's just kind of available to you, and you can use Entra ID to secure things all the way down to a table level inside the SQL database because it's a SQL database. You can there's already a pattern of how to give permissions to things. So this is where things get, I think, very interesting is because now all the other richness of Fabric is really, really close to what you liked about SQL databases, and it's just there available to you.
You're jumping in some uncharted territories here because I may save this for another topic, but I just want to mention this and you see where you want to go with this.
Yeah.
The fact that too that so we like that what you mentioned in the beginning of the conversation today, that data is for everyone, right?
Sure.
That idea and that Fabric's making that. Well, always SQL database have been managed. The data coming in has always been owned by DBA. That's because you needed that talent, that expertise, generally speaking.
I wouldn't say the DBA owned it, but the business asked for it. The DBA kind of like managed it, right? If you had a problem, you had a single you had a single person to go to. Hey, this data is wrong. It's not loading. DBA would show up and just make sure the tables are working the way they wanted to.
Right. Marketing, right. Joe from marketing wasn't going into Azure to do that.
He wasn't writing. Joe wasn't writing store procedures.
Right. But there's definitely to me right now, to your point, if data is for everyone and this ease of use with a SQL database, I really think we're getting to a point, Mike, where marketing and Joe from marketing can own and manage the SQL database.
Yes.
And I think that's going to change our lives when we get to that point. But that's the direction we're going.
Yes.
Would you agree? Yeah.
I think so. I mean, and this is where database as a commodity.
That's exactly
right. So this like. Again, this is one of the things like with Power BI, right? If everyone can get easy access to it and easily use it and manipulate it and push things in and out of it, right? that's it. Now SQL databases are becoming the commodity, right? What was the commodity before the Azure SQL database? The commodity
Excel.
before that was access databases,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
right? So, like, if you were a business user and you needed to make a database, a lightweight version of a SQL server, right? Without all the management controls and all the overhead, right? You could make an access database on your local machine. And you could have 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. You could have tons of these things. I walked into a company one time where everyone in the whole company was trained and educated on SQL. They were. It was great. But the downside was their massive servers that had all the information on them. Every time someone wanted data, nothing was cached. It was coming from the main servers. So what they would do is they needed like a little mini database on top of a bigger database that they could go query and say, look, I'm going to go hit this really big table on my really big server one time. I'm going to load the data down locally,
Yeah.
and then I can continue to manipulate it, right? But I needed something that was bigger than Excel, but not quite the full entire database that we had originally. So there was like 1,200 SQL Azure. I'm sorry, there was like 1,200 access databases, and they didn't even have 200 employees. So
I
there was like
know.
more access databases in the company than there were people that were there because everyone was just building little mini models of the big models. Like that's what. But this is the point, though. That was a commodity, right? When you make something free and almost not it doesn't cost you any extra money. Everyone had their computers. You could build as many databases as you needed to on your local machine. It became the commodity. And what happens with a commodity? You make a lot of them. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. But that's the reality of it. You have to figure out how to manage that. Does that make sense? What I'm like
Yes, my Microsoft Access was the MapQuest of data.
the MapQuest.
It served its purpose. I was one of those classes. I remember
No.
Power BI was
It
out for
was
like.
even earlier than that, Tommy. Access databases was the
No, I
Oregon
know.
Trail of games in the middle school. That's what it. That's what it is. It's.
The only difference, I would still play Oregon Trail now, but
I mean, they have newer versions of it, but
I
I'm
know
just saying
that's
they
a good
still have
one. That's
they
the
still have
Oregon Trail of data.
access database. But
Dude, it was
everyone
awesome.
and their friend played Oregon Trail growing up. That was the game. You know,
Yeah,
Tommy has typhoid again. Like
yeah. I
whatever.
was about to say, and just like Access Data Space, he killed more than he wanted to.
Mike just died. Your database has fallen over.
It's
It's
true.
dead now.
I remember 6 months after Power BI came out, we were in an Access training session. They wanted us to do that. And I remember all I could think the whole time was, why? Why this? Did you not see what just came out? And it was just this revelation that was coming. Like, why are we learning Access? I can do better and power this new tool.
Yes.
But that's the point, though. And you know what? If they do this with SQL databases, holy crap, was Access hard to learn too and frustrating.
Well, I
Like
mean, it had a
compare,
little. I mean, it did a good job of like again. It was like introducing the business user to SQL. I mean,
yeah,
It wasn't
yeah.
it wasn't ideal, I'll say that. It wasn't the best tool out there, but, how did I learn how to build a select statement? How did I learn how
I'll
to do a
tell you.
join between I
Listen,
used Access databases. Like, it had a very slight graphical interface where I could, like, build the relationship between two tables. I could grab two columns and put it down, and I could click on the SQL view, and it would just write out the SQL. This column, this column, this column, join on this thing here. That's what was, again, I took a full, graduate
yeah,
class on SQL eventually later on, but that was my first exposure to SQL, and it was like, again, it was like the idea of like the same concept as um, Power Query for
yeah,
learning M or data manipulation, right? Same concept. Here's a user interface that is slightly GUI in nature. You can drag and drop and make some graphical things on the page, but then you can then push them down to a table, which would then result into an actual like SQL statement that's actually
yeah,
doing the real work for you. So I mean, this is the same thing that I really like about Data Wrangler in Python, right?
yeah,
Same experience. I have a UI that I can see the changes. I don't really need to know how to write every little line of code, but you realize all you're doing when you're writing SQL is you're building like steps of things. Oh, I need these columns. Great. I need these columns from two different tables. Like a lot of those are known quantities.
yeah,
You can just do those things. Now you can get a lot more fancy with the SQL. So that's where I started. But then you're doing like very complex things that couldn't be represented with graphical
right,
interfaces, right? Inner joins or left outer joins or some other. You can get more complicated with like the joining solutions inside
right,
SQL. But again, you need a place to start from.
right. And I think that leads us to the how of this question. How do we start with SQL databases? And for me, I'm going through some of my own patterns right now. where honestly it's starting with I think that we're still at the limit of 3 databases are the limit in a capacity. That is currently what I've seen and tested out. I can only create 3 SQL databases in a F capacity, at least in an F1 or F2.
F2, yes.
F2, F2, F2. So that's the least
There may
the
be a hard
notification.
limit there. I don't know. I haven't seen the
Yeah.
documentation of that specifically. I'd have to dig around the docs a bit
Yeah.
more to see if that actually has a problem there. But
Yeah.
yes, you might be right.
So, but it is still a preview feature. But honestly, where I've started is really easy if you want to get data in, because obviously when you create the SQL database, it doesn't say what data do you want. It just creates a blank database with blank
Yes.
tables, blank views. And I
Yes.
started with a pipeline, and all I want to do is just copy data in. You can mirror, but I
Yep.
want to get that data stored in Fabric. So one of the big things I've done is I already have existing Azure databases, and I just copied the data in through a pipeline. The ease of that is incredible, and it's just another thing like no
Pipelines are great.
file. My gosh, it is really incredible. So I have the data in,
That
and then
again, back to my
yeah,
point earlier around like the
yeah.
slightly graphical user interface. Like there's a lot of
Mhm.
code behind that graphical user interface of the
Fine.
pipelines,
You've had
but
to
it's
do
now
this before, it would have
it's
been
like
nightmare.
right. It's now represented as like these little cards, these little actions, like the whole experience of the data, the pipeline. And I remember when Azure Data Factory came out earlier, writing. I remember way back in the day when Azure Data Factory came out, we were trying to use it, and there was no easy to use graphical interface. It
Mhm.
was all JSON. You had to write
Yeah.
everything, and I was like, I'm totally lost. I don't know what I'm doing. Like you could build them, but there was like almost no user interface to them, and all the features were
Gosh.
buried somewhere inside JSON. And they've changed all that now. So all that's not. It's all graphical user interface. It's you have the activities again. Back to my point, right? We're going to give you a semi-graphical interface of the things that you need to be doing, and most of the options are fill out these boxes, fill out these sections. You, when I know that the Azure Data Factory or the pipeline is JSON, I can
Mhm.
see how they're representing the UI that actually mirrors the
Right.
JSON. Like you have the
Right.
activity, and then you have like the general section, the comments, the title, and then you have the properties. Well, all those are just sections of JSON code that they're just giving you, and instead of you writing JSON, they're just giving you like a menu that is actually building the JSON for you, but in like a graphical form. That's all they've done.
Yeah.
It's
We don't have
really
we
handy.
don't ha we don't have a lot of those now what situations anymore, where I remember creating things in Azure, you're like, "Oh, I've created a synapse. Now what do I do?
Now what?
Now what?"
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen, and so copying that data in, once I have that SQL database, Mike, I've already been able to create views because I had something I was pushing from a data flow. I'm like, "Well, I don't want these columns, and I want it a little aggregated." Well,
Yes.
I could use data flow, but I could create they have this great interface, which is basically Power Query in SQL. It's like, "Oh, in Power Query or in that view, it's
Yeah.
what is it called? The visual query, the visual native query."
Yes. Yep.
And as you do that, you go through these transformation steps, and this goes, "Oh, do you want to create a view from what you just did rather than just viewing it?" And I was like, "I
Yeah.
would." Well, thank you very much. So I can start getting started once I have data in
Yes.
incredibly fast, and that's what I absolutely love.
And that's I think that goes to the ethos of all of Power BI and now Fabric, right? The ethos has been, initially it was 5 by 5, right? 5 minutes to set up, 5 minutes to wow. Like that was kind of like I think the experience that was there. Um, and then that was the initial experience. And I think now it's like a 5 by 5 by 5,
Mhm.
5 minutes to set up, 5 minutes to load data, 5 minutes to something else. I don't even know. There's a new language that they're trying to say. Regardless, though, to your point, Tommy, doing some of the simple things, data in, data
Mhm.
accessing, that makes things a lot easier. One of the last point I want to make here as I'm wrapping up and kind of giving my final thoughts here is I do want to call out at the end of the article. So there is a very clear call out here. When we had this thing called Data Marts was a SQL database for Power BI only. That was really the experience of it. And Data Marts never really got finished, didn't quite make it all the way through. And it felt like there was a good initial effort at a Data Mart. But what happened was Fabric came out, like literally Data Marts came out, and like maybe like 3 to 6 months into it, Microsoft said, we're pivoting, we're going to be doing Fabric. And so a lot of the resources I think got plucked and moved over to Fabric, it feels like to me. So Data Marts never really got finished. It was pretty reliable. It does that transactional level things to some degree. It gives you like a SQL endpoint, does some pretty good things. So now what? my opinion, I think, aligns with Nicola's opinion in this article, right? He says he could be wrong, but he says data marts are typically are thinking like a dead man walking. It's just a matter of time until they are officially sunsetted and replaced by the Fabric
Has to be.
SQL. I think this is the right approach, and I would like to see all of the features that data marts do, making sure that all those, like, I'd like to see a comparison chart. Like, what does data marts do right now currently, and what are all the equivalent features that the SQL database can do, the Fabric SQL can do as well, and make sure they're all lined up. So if you can give me all the features that data marts did, which again wasn't a very long list anyways,
Jeez.
push those features and make sure that all the equivalent features, like there's going to be, I'm waiting for the article here that says, here's how to migrate from Microsoft, not just us, but MVPs. Like, if you have a data mart, here's how to migrate over to the Fabric SQL database.
Yeah.
Now, I know people are going to be a bit bent out of shape because a data mart is a unit that is accessible inside Power BI only.
Mhm.
So
Oh, yeah.
this is one area where I think we're going to have some friction, and I'm just going to call it right now, right? If you were using data marts, you do need some kind of SQL database inside Power
Mhm.
BI. I think it makes good sense to put it there. I believe the data marts was only a premium per user feature. I don't
It
think
was.
data marts showed up for Power BI Pro.
Not Pro. It was not
Okay.
Pro.
The reason I'm calling that out is because if there's one thing of Fabric that I want to come back into Power BI only, and just for the premium per user, it would be the Fabric SQL database.
Mhm.
So what I'd like to see happen here is, yes, Microsoft, you're going to deprecate the data mart. Yes, get rid of it. Let's just use Fabric SQL databases as the right solution because you're building the right
Right.
thing. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see the same bits, the same code, I'd like to see the Fabric database show up for Power BI premium per user users inside Power BI. I don't think that's going to happen because I really think Microsoft's going to push all the users into Fabric anyways. But if again, this is like, what if I was Arun for the day, right? If I was Arun for the day,
We should do one of those again.
we should do one of those again. Like, where would you spend your money? I think I would spend a little bit of investment or see how much work it would take to actually give the Fabric SQL database to the Power BI premium per user. I think if you did that, you'll make a lot of premium per user customers very happy because they can actually feel confident that they can sunset their data marts, move into a more robust solution that would be Fabric SQL, and it'll just work. And then when they're ready, they can migrate or upgrade into proper Fabric, and then the SQL database will still just work. So
Yeah.
I look at it as it's an opportunity to bring more of those premium per user customers into the Fabric ecosystem by giving them the Fabric SQL database, and then saying, oh, by the way, all the other richness and goodness that you do need is still inside Fabric. If you want pipelines and notebooks and all the other richness that's there, real-time analytics, Kusto,
Right.
come over to Fabric. That's what we're going to get you with. But I do think you need to keep treating those premium per user customers really well. That's my opinion. Anyways.
Yeah. And I know we're getting close to time. I just feel as you say this, because I agree with you, but there are a few listeners who have sent mailbags about data marts that if they're exercising a little faster right now. So they are feeling that. But yeah, I know we're well past time. I'll do a quick closeout. Great article. It's going to be in the episode description, both on YouTube and in the podcast. Please take a look at it. It's an awesome way to really kind of summarize all the things with SQL databases. You know where I stand on this. You know where I see the potential here. It's a great way to get started with SQL databases and start getting that implemented in processes and data that is could be desired to be better. What a great opportunity. And that's exactly, if I wanted to get started with SQL databases, where I would is migrating that data to SQL. Here we go.
Nicola, I would say thank you very much for the article. Very well thought out. I really liked the what is it, the why you're using it, and then the how to implement it. So that was very good. Your great example here, you had a little bit of like tutorial part in the middle there, also really good. So if you're not watching the article or you haven't read this article, go check it out. It's in the description below. Definitely go read the article. Check it out. Very, very good. Highly recommended it. And Nicola's a genius. Honestly, I learn stuff from him all the time. Really good writer, very well educator. He does a lot of teaching, really good stuff that he's doing. So if you're not following him, you should definitely follow him on the social medias and listen to his articles that he's popping out because he's just a really really sharp guy. And I can't tell you the amount of things I've learned from him myself personally. So definitely follow Nicola. He's definitely worth it. And you would follow him at datamozart.com. I'll just throw the website in there in the chat as well. Definitely check him out. One worth watching as well, data-mozart.com. Anyways, with that being said, thank you all so much for listening to the podcast. We hope your exercise has gone well. We pushed you here an extra 5 minutes at the end, so finish strong. You get a little extra couple minutes here while we're talking to you. Thank you so much for your ears and your time. We know your time is valuable. Please, if you like this podcast, if you like what we're talking about here, and this was relevant to you, unpacking the things of Fabric, we'd really like you to share it with somebody else. Please spend some time with somebody else and let them know you like the podcast. We'd really encourage you to share it with other people so we can keep growing the audience here and we can talk about more things. With that being said, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. And please share with a friend since we do this for free. Do you have a question, idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to Power BI Tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central. And join the conversation on all Power BI Tips social media channels.
Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.